Hi, welcome to the Sifu Mimi Chan show. Thanks for joining the conversation. Hello. Welcome to another martial arts podcast episode. Today, I am going to be talking about one of my favorite Chinese kung fu weapons, the straight sword, or the gim, or the jian in Mandarin. So very exciting for me because it was actually one of the first weapons that I learned when I was growing up in Chinese martial arts that I learned from my father. And traditionally in our system, the gim is a very advanced weapon, and you don't actually get to learn it until several years into your journey. I think I have students who are on year maybe 12 to 14 or something like that and have just now started to learn the straight sword. So as you can see, it takes a very long time. And of course, in the Wah Lum system, which is something that I have been sharing a bit more about during these podcasts. We've had a few episodes now on lineage, on tradition, fundamentals, and I covered one of the other Chinese weapons, the stick, earlier. So in this episode, we're kind of going a little more in depth with everybody loves the swords. And so in our system, as you've probably heard by now, if you've listened to other episodes, it takes quite a while to advance. We really emphasize those fundamentals, those basics, really embracing those and actually building on that foundation. And unfortunately for some of our students that come in and that are just getting started, they are very wide-eyed and excited, and they ask, how long till I get to learn my first sword? And we usually just try to let them know that they're going to learn the basics first, and that over time they will eventually, if they are patient and hardworking, get to the sword. And the first sword that we actually teach is not the straight sword. So this is the straight sword, or the gim, or the jian. So for those of us who are just listening, basically it is a double-edged sword, meaning there is two sides to the sword that are both equally sharp, double edge, double meaning. For those of us on YouTube or watching in video, you can definitely see that it is a straight blade that is going to be sharp on both ends as well as at the tip of the sword. And of course, there's the handle of the sword and the guard, and this is the straight sword. But the first sword that students get to learn is the broadsword. And so that is this weapon here. So the broadsword, different than the straight sword, is that the inside edge here is going to be dull. It's going to be something that stays very close into the body and that can actually make contact with the body. And so for those of you just listening, basically one edge of it has kind of like a slight curve, almost like what you would hear other people describe as a saber, how it's kind of got that curved edge to it. And that's going to be your sharp end, whereas the inside of it, where you would make contact to your body, that's going to be much closer in and dull, where you can actually connect with it. And it is a very close weapon. So we tell our students that they usually get to the broadsword after over a year, maybe two, because if you remember the stick episode, usually it's within that first year, students get to learn the stick. And with that poem I shared last time was Do Wai Fu, Gim Wai Mo, Cheng Wai Sui, and Guan Wai Zhou. So that's the family names for each of the four kind of, I don't want to use the word classic because there's 18 classical Chinese weapons, but the four main familial weapons, and that is the broadsword, the straight sword, the spear, and the stick. So last time I talked a bit about stick and the spear, not as in depth with spear, but you did meet the grandfather of all the weapons. This is the broadsword, which is the father of all the weapons. And today's emphasis, however, will be on one of my favorites, which is the straight sword, gim, mother of all weapons. And this in particular straight sword was gifted to me. And I think you may, if you've seen Pui Chan Kung Fu Pioneer, quick plug for my documentary. If you've not seen it, you can do so on Amazon today. But in that documentary, you will have seen my father's Shaolin master. So the abbot of the Shaolin temple in the 80s. I'm going to be so embarrassed because I can't remember his name right now, but his master gifted him a sword when he was inducted into the discipleship of the Shaolin Temple. And that was also, I believe, a straight sword. So it has a lot of symbolism of a gift that bestows respect and honor and is passed through generations. So for me, this straight sword is an adult straight sword. So if you notice, this is actually the right height for me. This sword is the one that I actually practice with. This sword was also gifted to me from the Shaolin Temple, but from our very, very close family member who is actually one of my kung fu godfather, and he is Grandmaster Liang, who is of Erpo Shaolin, which is one of the biggest Shaolin kung fu schools at the Shaolin Temple. And we go there every few years. We spend a lot of time with the students there as well as the instructors. We do some exchange, but he actually gifted this to me before I became his godchild. So this is one of the gifts that he gave to me on one of my first trips to the Shaolin Temple and to visit his school. And it is like one of my favorite swords. It's really well balanced. It's a great practice weapon. For those of you who are watching, you'll notice it's not really sharp. It's not going to actually cut you. But if you go really fast, you'll get kind of more of that, you will get cut if you're slicing really fast. So for those of you listening, it is a practice sword, but this weapon is very meaningful to me because it was gifted by my godfather, and it is something that I also practice with. So the sword is often passed down through generations, but also is a very popular gift in Chinese martial arts that really symbolizes a lot of respect and honor, and passing a sword onto another is really a tradition, right? And so the straight sword has so many meanings. I think last time we discussed the four main weapons being the stick, spear, broadsword, and the game, the straight sword, which I'm talking about today. And we talked about this being the mother of all weapons. So we have the broadsword as the father. This is the game, which is the mother of all weapons. And then we also talked about the animal symbol or the animal spirit behind the weapon. So if you recall, the stick was the dragon, and the broadsword is the tiger, and the game or the jian or the straight sword is the phoenix. So this is, again, the real female represented weapon, and the animal spirit for this is the phoenix. And of course, that also has a lot of significance, being that the phoenix really rises, and it is one that really perseveres and persists. But we also talked about the length of time it takes to quote unquote master a weapon. And I really use this term loosely because this is, of course, old philosophical teachings, and I want to say even poetry, right? Like, it was written in books of old, and it's been passed through generations. And so I told you the stick pop quiz was 100 days to quote unquote master, and the broadsword and the spear was 1,000, and the straight sword is 10,000 days. So for those of you who are really great at math, that's not me. I know it's over 30 years of training. And I also like to consider that one day doesn't equal like, oh, I picked up the game today, so then I practiced for about 10 minutes. So that counts as day one. I really see this as like a full day, day of training, of actually absorbing yourself into that weaponry. And so that goes for stick as well. So any of these weapons that we say you can quote unquote master, I also believe it's mastery of the basic and the foundation. I don't actually believe like after 100 days of working with the stick, then you are now a master of the stick. I think it's in philosophical terms, very much like anything else. When you become a Sifu, you're a master of sorts, but I really believe at that point, you are now starting your journey anew. So you are now learning how to be a master. You get your own students, you learn from your students. And so that path kind of is a new journey, and it almost resets the clock, right? So when you've mastered a weapon, so after 10,000 days with the straight sword, I feel like the 10,000 day one, though, you really do have a deeper knowledge. I think it's more than just the basics, but there's so much complexity. And a lot of people ask Why do we jump from 100 days with a stick to 10,000 with the sword? And I will give you the same answer that my father usually gives me, which is ask the person who wrote this philosophy down, which of course we can't because they are deceased and we don't actually know who they are, but or ask Wang Long or ask Grandmaster Lei Quan Shan. And the thing is, I think it's really more of a philosophy, right? And so realizing that something like this weapon, which is super intricate, which has so much nuance to it, and it seems very simple. You'll see beginners even do it at tournaments and things like that. You'll see people wield this weapon, but to wield it correctly, to utilize it correctly, to get all of the intricacies of how much wrist movement is involved, I think it really does take 10,000 days. And I mean, to be honest, as you all know, I'm in my 40s because 40 fit foo. And I started this weapon, I want to say when I was maybe 7 or 8 years old. But I will say that I haven't practiced it every single day since I was 7 or 8 years old. And I was gifted my first game, which was much smaller back then. It was very short because I was actually a very short child. So seg into my short childhood. But yeah, so I feel like even though I've had over 30 years of training with the sword, I by no means feel like I've mastered it. I don't really feel like I am a master of the sword, but I will say that spending this much time with a weapon and delving deeper into it, you learn more about yourself, you learn more about how you move, and you move differently with it. So how I moved with the game in my teen years to now obviously is quite different, but I think my understanding of the weapon is greater, even though maybe my flexibility, my speed, and my agility is much slower, and maybe my mobility isn't as high. I do believe like my understanding of my weapon, how my body moves with the sword, is much, much more advanced than when I was younger, even though I was more of an athlete at the time, even though I was more agile. I'll give you an example. So one of the movements in the Wah Lum sword, the Wah Lum game set, is we're in like a kneeling position, and literally we are striking straight behind us, right? So the strike goes straight behind us, and you're basically supposed to bridge while you're in a kneeling position. Those of you who are viewing, as you can see, I'm not doing this. On the podcast, those of you listening, I should tell you, oh yeah, right now I'm totally in a backwards position with my head touching the floor. And then that will make you rush over to YouTube and see that I'm a liar. But basically, when I was young, I would have to do this kneeling position, and what my father made me do was actually he would say you're supposed to be able to eat an apple off of your heel. So leaning completely backward into a bridge while you're in that kneeling stance, he wanted me to be able to eat my apple and bring the apple up. He didn't waste apples on my training, and so I don't think I actually ever did use an apple, even though that was the goal. He would tie my sash into a ball and he would put it on my ankle, and then I would have to lean back and grab it with my mouth and bring it up multiple times. And so in order to just do that one movement, I'd have to be able to do that before I was even allowed to use the sword for that segment. So if you could imagine, at that time I was very, very flexible, and I will admit I don't think I can do that anymore. I would have to work up to it. But even though I could do something like that at that age, I was just sloppy with the sword, right? Like my movements, my understanding, it's like, yeah, you're striking forward. But really now when you're striking forward and you're thinking about all of the different elements that happens in one martial move, there's so much internally and externally that's happening in one move. So in our style in particular, we actually say there's 10 different things happening at one time. So in an external sense, without getting too far into it, there's all of the things happening with your body that's physical, like your eyes, your stance work, etc. There's 5 things happening there. Internally, there's also things happening with your breathing, with your chi and your energy and spirit, right? So like there's 10 things happening in one given movement. And that happens over and over and over and over as you do your martial arts, right? So for us who are Chinese martial art practitioners in particular, especially those who are traditional, the reason it takes so long, the reason someone doesn't pick up a gim or a straight sword until over 10 years into their training is because you're still trying to develop those skills into just a straight punch. I'll admit, even a straight punch, there's sometimes I don't think I'm hitting every single element. There's a lot of things to think about. And that is why Kung Fu means hard work. That is one of the reasons why it is so challenging. That is one of the reasons why there's so much depth of knowledge into learning proper traditional Chinese Kung Fu. It isn't just about the movement. There's also internal things that should be happening, and you shouldn't have to think about them. They should actually all just come together and work in harmony. So it's really fascinating and frustrating for those of us who are practitioners to be able to accomplish that. But at the same time, it's very inspiring to know no matter how long years you've been doing something, there's always more to learn and there's always more to improve. So with the game in particular, one of the things that's pretty amazing is that that 10,000 hours, which I think has really been popularized now. I know that he was not the originator of that saying. And then since then, there's been all these people that have taken it to the next thing. It's not 10,000 days or 10,000 hours of practice. It's 10,000 hours of purposeful or perfect practice or correct practice. And I mean, I think that goes without saying. If you're going to do something 10,000 times and you do it badly, then that probably doesn't do you much good. But basically, the book Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, one of the things that really jumped out at me was that 10,000 hours putting in that time to master or perfect a movement. And, you know, of course, now when we tell people, we say, yeah, you have to do perfect practice or purposeful practice or intentional practice. And I think that goes without saying. But what was fun was that was exact same number as that I had learned growing up from, you know, when I was in the 1980s, when I was a really young child, was this number that jumped out at you of 10,000. So I think it's just a matter of like thinking about the fact that there's this old ancient Chinese philosophy, and then you're reading this book by, you know, very famous author, someone who explains things really well and teaches you all these different types of ideas through his writing, like Malcolm Gladwell, and how it kind of aligns. And as most of you know, also my husband Oscar, Sifu Oscar, who runs Control Your Health, he often delves very, very deep into the strength and conditioning and the fitness side of things and the scientific method of things, and like constantly learning the scientific reasonings behind why we breathe this way or why we move this way or why we, you know, should keep things in alignment. And, you know, it's really cool to see like how in tandem that is with Chinese martial arts, where we maybe didn't explain the science of why, but with his knowledge, we've been able to kind of have those two lanes go parallel and line up and be very, very much working together. So it's always nice to have that reinforcement of what we've been learning and then having reasoning behind it. So I thought it was a lot of fun that Malcolm Gladwell released that book and popularized the idea, because it is something philosophically we equate, you know, the game or this weapon being the most difficult and the most sophisticated or so, and it's taking 10,000 hours. So I thought that was really cool. Another thing that people find really fascinating, I think you'll notice that I am in the Wah Lum Cultural Center right now. Those of you who are watching this, those of you who are listening, next door to the Wah Lum Temple is a cultural center that was constructed to hold and house all of my father's treasures and memories and calligraphy and art and gifts that he has received over the years. I am currently standing in the media, the movie, the exhibition room. So there are posters from like the 1970s of my father's performances at John Hancock Hall. There are photos and images of Pui Chang Kung Fu Pioneer festivals where we won all the awards. And behind me, of course, is the Mulan section, which most of you all know that since I did the martial arts video reference and since I was the model for the character, we did a lot of work with Disney. And over there, you'll see kind of one of the original sketches. I know that the lighting in here is fluorescent, so there's some reflectiveness. So those of you online watching, this is just me on the iPhone, so please be kind about the production value of the podcast, because it's just me here. But basically, we have some paraphernalia, some articles, and just some memory, which is really cool. We got these posters that are behind me at the wrap party for the movie itself, and they're signed by Mark Hen and Ruben Aquino, which are the lead animators for Mulan and Shang Li, who was modeled after Sifu George Key, my cousin, right up there. And so it's been really nice to kind of have all of this on display for people to be able to share and for people to be able to learn a little bit about our journey. But the game, or the straight sword, also played an important role in the film Mulan. Now, even though she takes her father's sword, so one of the things is, again, we're seeing this generational, not gifting, because technically she stole his sword, but that was to save his life. So technically it was a gift of sorts, right? So she had with her father's sword, which was a straight sword. And we saw him in the beginning of the film kind of practicing his, martial straight sword, and how that's the family sword. And for her to have taken that is the evidence that she is now taking upon her the family name and taking upon her the responsibility to go to war in her father's place. So I feel like the sword means so much in terms of family, and in that film in particular, like having that kind of passed on, and her taking that helm, her taking it in her hands literally was her, honoring her family and sacrificing really for her family. And the greatest thing about being in that film was learning a lot more about the folklore of Mulan, because I will be honest, like, I had heard of her growing up. My father had shared little bits. He'd say "Fa Mulan," and sometimes call me that, and just because really it's one of the female heroine characters. But I didn't really get to research and understand more about the character until I worked on the movie. And for those of you who are watching online, there's the artistry up there, which is from the movie. And then down below is a little bit more of a traditional artistry of the folk Mulan tale, which is not from Disney, that's from another calligrapher, but it really kind of gives you that. I love this picture because it really gives you the yin and yang of her, where you could see her with the flowers in her hair and how feminine, but all around her is just her army gear and her soldier battle gear. And it's just really kind of that contrast, but also that she's that same person. So the thing about the sword in this film was, even though she didn't really utilize it in the end, like in terms of battle, she actually stole the sword of the villain. And even though the sword of the villain wasn't a straight sword, it was like kind of a snake sword, she utilized it as it would have been a straight sword, as it was a game. She utilized the sword in that manner. So I really see the symbolism of this sword as one, generational, being passed on and having meaning to the family, being the mother of all weapons, and having that, that connectivity to who you are, because it really reflected her taking on that persona in terms of Mulan, but also in terms of the straight sword. And then in the movie in particular, her disarming the villain and taking the weapon and then posing in that iconic pose, which I like to consider iconic. It's not that pose here that you see in there, but it's this one here. And the game finger is very, very important. So having this representation, even though they didn't really portray it that much in the film, the game finger is very, very important, because without having your direction, it's almost like your arrow, it's almost like your guide. That's how my father explains it. It's like this goes together with the sword. And so you see a practitioner that doesn't do the game hand, then they're probably not very traditional. And that's okay, but I'm just talking from a traditional sense, that the other hand, not just the hand that wields the weapon, is equally important, because it works in conjunction. It works as a complement to what your sword hand is doing. And the same goes for broadsword. Perhaps I'll break that down another day. But I feel like oftentimes beginner practitioners really focus in on the weapon hand or what that weapon is doing, and not enough on what that counterpart is. And that is one of the things about your 10,000 days of work. You can take time to kind of go deeper and deeper and deeper and learn a little bit more about the weapon and what it entails, and how you can just improve on it, right? Improve upon the weapon. So yeah, the gimji, or jian, sorry, my Mandarin's not very good, nor is my Cantonese, but it's very, very important for the straight sword. So these are some of the essential foundations for when we talk about the straight sword. So it's like having the right posturing, having the right stances, of course, in a Kung Fu sense, but having that double-edged finger, having the game hand is really fingers is very, very, very important. So this is just a little bit of fun conversation about the straight sword, how it's been important to me in terms of growing up with it being one of the first weapons that I got to learn, which I was grateful for because it got my 10,000 day kickstart going. And so it allowed me to take that journey with a weapon, and then also just that weapon being gifted to me by someone very, very close to me, especially in a martial sense, and having that intention with me as well. When I practice, there's like a little bit of a weight of that relationship between Wah Lum and the Shaolin Temple, and our ongoing relationship that my father started, and of course that he is a big part of. So it's really interesting how something simple like a weapon or just like this, the straight sword, how we can talk about it and it has so many different layers. And I love that because that's so representative of Chinese martial arts. There's just so many layers. You can continuously delve deeper into one thing, like a sword. So it could just be a sword, but it could also be an ancestral weapon that gets passed down through generations. It could also be a gift that represents respect and taking on responsibility and kind of coming into your own. It can also, represent being something that symbolizes hard work and 10,000 days of effort and mastery. It could be so many things. And I think what's interesting about it as well is it's also very personal. So what it means to me may not necessarily mean the same to another practitioner or instructor of martial arts. It may not have the same meaning, right? Because I would like to meet other practitioners that had to eat their sash off of their ankle. I'm just kidding. I'm sure that other practitioners have had to go through far worse things, maybe with like fire or, spikes or something like that. But we all have our journey is the point. We all have our own journey. We all have our own challenges. We all have our own way of viewing how we practice, who we are, what that means to us. And I think it's been really enlightening to be able to kind of share in that journey with all of you. So for those of you listening, really appreciate you taking the time to kind of listen to these stories and allowing me to articulate and just kind of, think about these lessons that I've gotten to learn. Because if I didn't do these podcasts, in all honesty, I'm not sure that I would really share as much. And recently I've been able to do a few workshops that have allowed me to think about these lessons a little bit more than I have in the past. And it really made me realize that so many people presume that you just kind of go through and you learn the weapons, you learn things in order, you just kind of go through, and it's a very physical based martial art. It's just all very physical. And for me, I think there's a lot more emotion, and there is a lot more there's a lot more that's personal to me about these weapons. Each of my weapons, it's not that I name them or anything, but each of my weapons have a very personal connection. And there's a story that I actually get to remember and recall whenever I pick up that weapon to train or practice. And then in addition, every time I or you pick up your weapon to train or practice, you also will be creating a new memory and a new story and a new narrative and a new journey. And so it's really cool how it comes full circle, but also how like that journey always continues. So I hope you enjoyed learning about the gim or the straight sword, or gim, jian, double-edged sword. it's a really, really, really complicated and special weapon, but it is a lot of fun. So if you do get to learn it, I would love to hear your thoughts on how your straight sword, your double-edged sword journey is going. And thank you for listening, and also for being able to share a little bit of the Mulan experience. I know people are always curious about that, and so glad that I could be here in the Cultural Center to share about that as well. And if you have any questions, please let me know. If you have comments or you're enjoying these type of podcasts where I kind of go off for 30 minutes about Chinese martial arts and my experience with them, I realize that my experience in Chinese martial arts has been very unique because I'm just basically fortunate to have been born into this world, and that my teacher is Grandmaster Pui Chan, and that I have been able to witness so much and have been able to grow in this environment. So thanks for listening, and let me know your thoughts. Until next time, see you then.
That's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening to the Sifu Mimi Chan Show. You can become a patron of the show at patreon.com/Sifu Mimi Chan to help keep this podcast going. Follow me and interact on social media at Sifu Mimi Chan on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook.